Kyle Whittingham shed light on the Utah's plan to bounce back and become a contender in the Big 12 conference as soon as next season. And that's possible. Utah could turn it around in one off season. What did Kyle Whittingham say? And how important is nailing the offensive coordinator hire for this team? We're breaking it all down on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media as well, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JT Wistersill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by KSL Sports' Alex Napolis here. And Alex, Kyle Whittingham spoke to the media and offered some insight as he was asked about the future of this team and talked about how Utah is going to try and bounce back next season, what their plan is. And he gave some really interesting answers. One thing he brought up right away is that it's probably going to be 50-50 in terms of the players are going to bring in, from recruits to also the portal players you add. He said it'll be an influx of probably 40 to 45 guys. I mean, they're going to have like 25 seniors walk, which is obviously a crazy high number. The roster limit also, this is important to keep in mind, something Coach Whittingham did mention. Roster limit's going to shrink to 105, and you'll probably go from 40 walk-ons to like 10, so it's a lot smaller of a number there too. Utah's roster will look different next season with the limited walk-ons, but I do think, particularly focusing on what he talked about with the portal, this is the way you have to do it in the modern world of college football. You have to recruit and add win-now players to stay at the forefront. I like that Utah's doing that while also prioritizing, bringing in some recruits. Still has to matter, but transfer portal guys are the name of the game right now, and I think this is a good strategy that Utah's going to employ.
Yeah, and he specifically pointed at a team like Oregon, who has been kind of the model of not only bringing in high recruits, but also bringing in high players from the transfer portal. And he talked about how that Oregon team is kind of the model of what people should be following now, what they should be doing to rebuild from season to season. 25 seniors, that's a lot of players to be losing. And so that's the world of college football. You have to hurry and replace them quick. However, now it's more of what type of talent and what type of players can we get from the transfer portal with the revenue sharing, with the collective, and all those other means, and to really build this roster and to try to figure out what this Utah team is going to be next season.
Bo Nix was a Heisman contender a season ago. Oregon went out and recruited another Heisman contender. Say what you want about Dylan Gabriel. He's one of the top 8 guys for the award, no matter how you really want to slice it right now. They got another Heisman recruit. They lost a lot to the NFL, and they still are they're the best team in college football right now with what they've done, being undefeated. The win against Ohio State's the best in the country, in my opinion. So that is a great model to look after and try to do. And obviously one thing that's been key to Oregon's success is NIL. And NIL and just the money you can pay your players is going to be huge going forward. So Kyle Whittingham talked about, the revenue sharing future. That's where Utah, they has a number budgeted and they're ready to go shopping in the portal. Utah Athletics and all of the major college athletics teams are going to have $20 million to spend from their own athletic budget they can set aside. So in the past, bringing on recruits and things like that, that came from your NIL collective. Now the university itself is setting aside $20 million to pay players through the transfer portal, recruiting, whatever it may be. Now, the thing to know about that $20 million, this is what the revenue sharing is. That $20 million is for all sports. So it's not like Utah has $20 million for football, $5 million for basketball. No, they have to decide how they allocate that $20 million. Is a lot of it probably going to football? Yes, football drives the mothership that is an athletic program, but it's not all $20 million that goes into there too. So this is going to be big for Utah. The fact that the athletic department can get in on this gives them an extra boost in recruiting, but collectives are still going to be huge. I mean, that'll be the difference for a lot of these schools, right? Is you will have the Oregon collective continuing to step up, the Ohio State collective continuing to step up. So Utah needs to continue to grow the collectives, but it is nice that universities can now help try and land these guys, as this is the new world of college football.
Yep, and that's exactly what Kyle said as well too, right? In that press conference, you have to supplement your revenue sharing with collective money, right? It's because Obviously, like you mentioned, the revenue sharing is across the board for everybody. It's not just directly for football. Kyle Whittingham did say it was going to be a big bump for them this offseason. However, you still have to be able to supplement that with your collective in order to get the I guess the top talent. This is kind of what this is now. This is free agency. This is the NFL free agency that we are now seeing in college football through the transfer portal. What type of talent, what type of top talent can you get with your collective money and now with your revenue sharing money?
Yeah, in Utah, they got to prioritize, you mentioned free agency, not just adding guys, but you got to keep your own guys and prevent them from hitting free agency is a big thing too. Utah has some really talented players that teams are going to be calling about probably and trying to lure them away with a nice NIL deal. Utah has to retain that talent if they want to bounce back and be successful too. And Kyle Whittingham, I appreciated his honesty talking about, some of the mistakes this team has made in their recruiting and just in the past that this team has made with their philosophy. He said, look, in the past, they've been a recruit, develop, and manage roster team. That's not today's world of college football anymore. Sure, part of being successful is still recruiting and developing, but you need guys to be able to play and hit the ground running right away. We see teams like Georgia are able to be really successful because not only do they have the guys that the 5 stars that they've homegrown, that's also different because you don't have 5 stars on your roster if you're Utah. So when you're getting that middle level talent, that's where you need to be more like transfer portal adapt. Like we've seen Colorado make a massive turnaround. Kyle brought up Colorado today, using it as an example of what they've been able to do. We already mentioned Oregon, Ohio State. These are teams that have added and built rosters through the transfer portal. If you're not landing 5-star recruits, this is what you have to do because 3 and 4-star guys, when they're developed, that takes more time usually. And a lot of times you're going to lose out to those guys who are the veterans and more experienced. And obviously one of the biggest reasons Utah's in this position is because they haven't developed their quarterback room outstandingly, as well as the injuries that they've been dealt with too. That's a massive part of this too. But I liked hearing Kyle talk about the failures that they've had as an organization, like bringing up, he's not just saying, oh, this is just bad injury luck for the second straight year. We'll bounce back. We'll be fine next year. No, Utah football has to do things differently to succeed in 2025. And I'm really glad that Kyle Whittingham is taking ownership of that and already talking about the things that they plan on doing.
No, and there was a specific question that was asked to him about the culture of Utah, right? And the ability to find diamonds in the rough, develop them, and make them into really good contributors for the team. You can't really count on that anymore. And Kyle recognized that and said that, you can't count on guys for sticking around for 3 to 4 years. You look at a wide receiver like Mikey Matthews last season, who ended up transferring to Cal, huge recruit coming out and joining this team, but he was only here for a year. He ended up transferring away, right? You can't, you would hope you want those guys to stick around for the 3 to 4 years. However, that's just not something, the reality is that's just not something you can necessarily count on in this day and age of the transfer portal.
It's not. Also, you brought up Mikey Matthews. I was curious. Okay, so Mikey Matthews so far this season, I can't be the only one who after you brought him up was curious. Like, oh yeah, Mikey Matthews, what's he doing this year? So he's got 27 catches, 240 yards, a touchdown, 8.9 yards per carry. Probably, but comparable wide numbers to what all the other Utah wide receivers have kind of been putting up outside of Dorian Sayers. So that's what Mikey's been doing this season for those of you that are curious of how his trip to Cal is going. And obviously the Golden Bears have had a rough go. They've been in a couple games. They almost got Miami that one night, but just didn't end up going their way too. But yeah, this is the modern world of college athletics. And one of the other quotes I love that Kyle Whittingham said was, he said, it's going to be a heavy shopping season for us in the portal. Good. It has to be if you're Utah. With how this season's gone, the changes and things you need to do to try and bounce back, that's what has to happen if you're Utah. So I like that Coach Whittingham said that. But another big thing that this Utah team has to do is they got to figure out their offensive coordinator. Let's talk about Utah's offensive coordinator position and how much of a priority, as well as how Utah is approaching that hire that will be the biggest they make of all of the talent and additions they make this offseason, in my opinion. I'm going to break down that in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Roy. Roy is your place to go to help your favorite athletes stay with your team. Hey, Locked On Utes fans, listen up. You need to download the Roy app. You have heard us talk about Roy this season, how they have revolutionized the NIL industry. Roy allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Roy. You get your money back if that player transfers. So that's right. So you can support an athlete individually, and then if they don't decide to come back to the school, your money's returned to you. Roy is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the long-term planning. This week, the Roy player I'm showing my support for is Spencer Fano. Spencer Fano has been playing great football all season long. Love seeing him get in the end zone on that 2-point conversion. A great play drawn up by Utah's interim offensive coordinator, Mike Bajakian. But I'm Spencer Fano. He's been a fantastic right tackle this year. He's been one of the best tackles in college football, in my opinion. He's been incredible. So Spencer Fano deserves this. And by depositing a little appreciation on Fano's account, you can do that just to download the Roy app. You can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or just go to joinroy.com. Now let's spotlight our player of the week and our key moment. We're going to throw in some key money too. And as I said, that's just got to be that 2-point conversion too. So join me in showing some love for Spencer Fano. Download the Roy app or joinroy.com today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces for Locked On. Every athlete from every team is there. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players, change the game today with our friends at Roy. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time is my favorite ticketing app because what do? They have a panoramic view that lets you know exactly what the view is going to be like in a seat before you buy. It's also that all-in pricing, the tagline that shows you the feature and total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout, curation that makes it even easier to save more on sports, concert, comedy, and theater events, the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. The Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. It's capital L for locked, O for on, C for college for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Alex, coming in here talking about Utah's biggest hire and move they have to make this offseason, and that's hiring an offensive coordinator. And that was something that Kyle Whittingham already said. They're already underway in that process of trying to determine, like, hey, who are some candidates that we could reach out to when the time is right? And it's something that's Utah's top priority so they can provide the recruits with clarity. And something else I like, Morgan Scalley heavily involved in this decision. Morgan Scalley will be the head coach, but he wants to have his offensive coordinator in place. And I expect too, like the offensive coordinator, when Morgan's the head coach, I expect this to be a lot like, this is a bad example because they're not doing great right now, but Lincoln Riley is not very involved with USC's defense. I don't imagine Morgan Scalley, and maybe this is where we'll see if Morgan Scalley still wants to call the defensive plays, right? I think Sharif Shaw would be a great defensive coordinator if Utah decided to make him such. But at the moment, I feel like Morgan would handle the defense and the OC will handle the offense. So the offensive coordinator is going to have a lot of say and pull at Utah. This is a pivotal hire. I love that Scalley's involved in it. And I love that Utah realizes how important it is because you're going to have a hard time getting offensive recruits to commit if they don't know what system they're signing up for.
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head. I love that Scalley is obviously going to be super involved in this decision. Because obviously the head coach in waiting is a title that, you know, hopefully that we're eventually going to see Scalley jump into that role and become the full-time head coach down the road. And so it makes the most sense to make sure that he is involved just in case, because you don't know what the future holds. You don't know what's going to happen. So you can make sure it's a guy that Scalley wants there and Scalley can work with. And like you mentioned, it's going to be a very important hire because right now is a really critical time for Utah. Kyle's talking about the transfer portal. Kyle's talking about roster construction and how this Utah team wants to move going forward. Mm-hmm. But a big centerpiece to all that is going to be the offensive coordinator. So who's going to come in and be the offensive coordinator for the University of Utah? It's a very important decision to make for further recruiting, for the transfer portal, and obviously for down the line once Scalley decides to, or once Kyle decides to step down, Scalley takes the mantle of head coach.
Yeah, and we're still waiting to see how soon is that going to be. Is that going to be at the end of this season? Is that next season? Still heavily believe it's one of the two. I guess technically he could go 3 more, but he already said he's definitely not going to. He's more than likely not going to be there in 27. before the year started. I'm still very much up in the air. I've talked about this openly on this show several times. Like originally, if Kyle was going to ride off into the sunset, I do believe this would have been his last year. That's just not, and once again, it's not sourced. That's just like looking at it like, okay, he's talking about retirement. I think he wants to go out on top. He's not going to have the chance to do that. So is he willing? Is this season the most frustrating of his career? Not my words, Kyle Whittingham's words himself. Is that enough to light the fire to run it back one more time? I'm very curious to see if that is the case. One thing I'm also really pleased with, when a team is not performing well, you want to see them take that accountability, admit their mistakes, and realize what they need to do moving forward. One of the biggest things that Utah had made mistake with is their offense and how complicated it was to learn. That cannot be the case in today's era of college football, especially when the offense that is very complicated. We haven't seen this team put up 38 points in a long time. And Bryson Barnes knew this offense. Like, he'd been in the system for a few years, and last year, and it's still a backup quarterback, but like Utah didn't do it. Kyle said they need to be more plug and play moving forward. No more 2 to 3 years to learn. That absolutely has to be the case. That's where it is every good program in the country. Ohio State and Oregon, we've talked about them a few times now. They have transfer quarterbacks. In my opinion, they're the top 2 teams in college football. Why were those players able to hit the ground running? Because it's a plug and play system. That doesn't mean the system can't be advanced, complex, take time to learn. But guess what? These guys arrive at these schools, most of them, before the spring semester gets underway. So the goal should be, it's a complex system that you're practicing and working on from January through spring ball, through fall camp, and hit the ground running when the season gets rolling. That is several months still where you can put a complex offensive system in place and you bring in a high-level quarterback that's not just high level with his play, but obviously with just the ability to comprehend and make those complex reads and plays too in whatever offensive system you run. And I do think Utah has those guys on the roster. I just think that whatever Utah's done offensively is obviously not putting their players in position to succeed, especially a guy like Wilson, who's been thrust in here right away. 2 to 3 years can't happen that way in college football anymore. Take you to learn an offense. This is something that has to change with Utah. And I like that they're going to be looking for an offensive coordinator that is going to have a system that can be grasped a lot quicker than Andy Ludwig's was in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, again, just right on the head, just like Kyle Whittingham said, this isn't something, this can't be a long drawn out process because there's no guarantee on if a guy returns the next season, which again is just unfortunately the world that we live in. There's no guarantee players are going to be sticking around 3 to 4 years to learn a system. So it does have to be a little bit more plug and play. It has to be a little bit more simplified, and maybe you bring in somebody who can deliver on that. If just someone who can come in and have a simple plug and play system. If things have to change a little bit for the offensive scheme that Andy Ludwig has tried to instill here for so long, then so be it, right? This is about evolving, this is about growing, this is about changing, and this is about learning and kind of growing into the new era of college football. And if that's a more simplified system that will not only help transfers, not only help your high school recruits, but obviously potentially helping Isaac Wilson being a better system as well. That I think that would be huge for Utah.
It would. And I've talked openly. I still feel like Wilson showed, it's debatable if it was his best game on Saturday. I think the Oklahoma State's up there too. And I know some people are like, he threw 3 interceptions. I know, but he had moments that were some of his best as a Utah player. And there were times where I was like, okay, this can be Utah's future starting quarterback on a Big 12 championship team even. Wilson has that potential to me, so I don't want to give up on him yet. Utah needs to bring in competition for him because he's obviously not done enough where it's like, oh yeah, give him the job. But Utah should still very much be interested in continuing their investment in Isaac Wilson.
Absolutely.
One other thing that Utah should potentially be interested in continuing their investment in is offensive coordinator Mike Bajakian. Some of you are going to hear that and go, JT, what in the world are you talking about? This offense has been dreadful. Yes, it has a lot of times, but as I've talked about a few times on this show recently, I think when you watch Utah's offense, Mike Bajakian is consistently putting players in positions to make plays. And yes, Mike Bajakian could be better at play calling at times, sure. Like when you're struggling like this, everyone needs to be a little bit better. But also say this, Mike Bajakian cannot change Utah's offense. This is an incredibly difficult position that he's been put in, having to take over in the middle of the year. But he has added some really nice and quality wrinkles. Against Houston, a lot of short screen passes that were going to get his quarterbacks easy completions. A lot of those throws, too, that quarterbacks weren't able to make. Also, against Colorado, guys, I know we're frustrated by how things turned out for Utah, but we can't just yell fire the offensive coordinator when we're running the ball for 2 yards a carry. You can't be one-dimensional, and Utah was getting worked up front. There's nothing Mike Bajakian can do about that when you're just getting your butt kicked on the line of scrimmage, and Utah was routinely. So I think Mike Bajakian has done some really good things. I've liked some of the play designs. I think he's helped Wilson play some of his best ball. He already has a working relationship with Isaac Wilson. I am not saying Mike Bajakian should be given the offensive coordinator job. I am saying Mike Bajakian should absolutely have a chance to interview for it. These next 2 games should serve as a continued audition for it. And if they determine that Mike Bajakian is the best option for the job, I think I would trust that decision. I really would. Alex, how would you feel about it?
I feel like in the case, I mean, we've seen a little bit of the different style that I think Bajakian ultimately wants to bring to this Utah team, but I feel like it is difficult to really install what you want to do halfway through the season, right? I feel like it would be an injustice to Bajakian to really judge him off of what we've seen over the past 3 or 4 games, however long he's kind of been in charge. Like you mentioned, JT, I think these next 2 games are a really big audition for Bajakian. If we continue to see, I really liked Isaac's play in the third quarter. I'm sure you can agree. Yep. Isaac looked a lot better and a lot more comfortable in that third quarter. If we can continue to see that Isaac Wilson down the stretch here, then we should definitely we should definitely take Mike Bajakian into consideration.
Yeah, that's all we're saying. Consideration. You interview other candidates. You don't look outside. Mike Bajakian is obviously not proven. Oh, I'm the guy to lead the Utah offense. No. But he's done enough to potentially be that guy once you see what his full plans and adjustments he would want to make to this offense is. And that's something that only Morgan Scalley and Kyle Whittingham are going to know when they sit down with him, when he says, hey, here's the massive overhaul I want to make. Because an overhaul is obviously coming to Utah's offense. It has to when you've been one of the worst offenses you are the worst offense in the Big 12 over the last few weeks. I know technically there's a stretch where they were higher than Houston, but we know that Utah's offense has been dreadful, just to keep it real. But it's going to be interesting to see what the offseason holds for this team. We got senior day coming up on Saturday, Iowa State. It's going to be a big test. A lot of seniors, one of the best classes in Utah football history with what this group accomplished, 2 conference championships, and some really, even last year going 8-4 with all the injuries, a lot to be pleased with this class. So we'll talk about that more tomorrow. But we do want to talk about some big news that happened today. Utah football games can be played on TNT. That's right, the little old network that does Inside the NBA as well. And speaking of Inside the NBA, they're actually very tied to why Utah football will be playing on TNT. We're going to talk about that in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot goals just to save a few bucks, right? It has to be easier. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider, not Mint Mobile. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. They'll get you started right now. All 3 months plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, you can go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. That's mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege to cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. And this is another thing too, disclaimer, you guys want to know is $45 upfront payment required, the equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan, speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. You can see Mint Mobile for more details and head over to get in on their offer today. I don't know if all of you are NBA fans. Many of you may not be, but I am. So I'm a big fan of TNT's Inside the NBA. ESPN obviously gets the finals every year, but Inside the NBA is the show, and in my opinion, the best studio show of all time. Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, Ernie Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal. They make basketball insightful and incredibly humorous too. Well, with the recent NBA rights deal in flux, what ended up happening was ESPN re-upped, but Amazon and NBC swooped in and got the NBA rights away from TNT. So TNT didn't have the NBA anymore. But what did TNT have? The most entertaining studio show in all of sports. That holds a lot of value. And ESPN knows it does too. So ESPN decided they want a piece of Inside the NBA. ESPN made a deal to license Inside the NBA. So Inside the NBA is going to produce by all the same people. It will just be now run and shown on ESPN starting next season. Well, TV deals and trades can be a little funny because usually you send something back. And that's what the case is. And that's how we get to Utah football. I don't know about you guys. I was a little frustrated that some of Utah's games were playing on ESPN Plus. I like ESPN Plus. I think it's a nice addition and tool for what it could have. But college football games still meant for the television screen and still deserve to be played on linear cable. That's still the biggest and most wide-reaching, even though most households have ESPN Plus, Netflix, all the things of that nature. But Utah played games that were not on linear TV. I think that's a disservice to Utah's brand. That will not be the case because what the Big 12 did and ESPN came to agreement on was instead of putting those games on ESPN Plus next year, those games will be played on TNT. So not the marquee matchups on TNT. TNT will not get their first pick of the draw. That'll still be Fox and ESPN, but they're going to get those other games that otherwise would have been on ESPN Plus. I think this is a great win for TNT to get college football. And I love that Utah is going to be back on the big screen full time every game, pretty much that I know next year.
Yeah, and on top of that, there's also some basketball games included in the deal as well.
Thank you.
So it will be both football and basketball that will be on TNT thanks to this deal. And so, I mean, ultimately, I feel like everybody wins, right? ESPN gets inside the NBA, which, like you mentioned, is a huge show and is a huge pickup. It's a very big pickup for ESPN, who I think their basketball coverage has honestly, like their studio show has really lacked over the course of the last couple of years. So that's a huge win for ESPN, and it's a good, I guess, a good deal in return for TNT, right? They need something to fill up some airtime now that NBA won't be a part of TNT. Unfortunate for them. But now they'll have some Big 12 football and some Big 12 basketball in return, thanks to this deal that they have struck, thanks to their settlement with the NBA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as part of the settlement, ESPN, this comes from Front Office Sports, will sub-license 13 football games and 15 men's basketball games per year. And also, this begins in 2025, and the deal will span the lifetime of the Big 12's 6-year, $2.2 billion package with ESPN and Fox. So, not the top games. You're not going to see Utah versus BYU on TNT, but the Utah versus Houston, if that's who ends up being down there again next year. And if Utah has a down year, they play those games on TNT. And obviously, look, Utah men's basketball, they had the unfortunate loss to Mississippi State, but you could expect them to have to play some games on TNT, barring a big turnaround next year. So going to be fun to watch Utah on TNT. You can see Utah on Fox, on ESPN, maybe on ABC. Things probably need to change for Utah in order for that to happen, their brand. But that's what this whole episode was about, right? Getting the brand back in that position where you are a late night marquee matchup. And I'm excited to follow this team along the journey of the offseason. But we still got some games coming up. So make sure you keep it at Locked On Utes. Alex, you do a great job covering this team and all the sports going on in Utah. Where can everyone hear more of your stuff?
Absolutely. I'm there at that handle just under the name at Napolis Alex. There I try to talk as much Utah football and really any local Utah sports. And then also you can find all of our stuff at KSL Sports.
Make sure you guys check them out on the Saturday show as well, getting you primed for all the games going across on the crazy college football Sundays, which we only have 2 of them left. That's still so sad to think about. Really only 2 for Utah because bowl eligibility, obviously, and uphill battle for this Utah squad, but that gets us close to all the offseason content, and it figures to be a thrilling offseason covering this team. Alex, thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. Always happy to be here.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow previewing the Cyclones. Utah's got a game. Iowa State reeling after a couple losses, although they did bounce back this last weekend. What kind of performance should we expect from Iowa State? Can Utah get a dub? We're breaking it all down tomorrow. We hope you'll join us then.